The most famous pizza story in the world appears to be a forgery. The letter that proves a queen fell in love with a red, white, and green pizza has been picked apart by researchers, and the wording, the handwriting, and the seal all raise serious doubts. For a long time, that looked harmless, the kind of flattering myth every country invents about its national dish. Italy repeated it, tourists believed it, and the pizzeria at the center of it is still serving customers today. But here's the part that doesn't fit. Italians didn't actually like pizza. In Naples, it was food for the desperate, sold on the street to people who couldn't afford a kitchen. Wealthy Italians called it disgusting, and one famous writer described it as something closer to garbage than a meal. Then a cholera epidemic tore through Naples, and the city's food became a national embarrassment overnight. So the obvious explanation is that pizza simply survived, moved to America, and got lucky with immigrants. That sounds reasonable, and it's what most people assume. Except pizza wasn't saved by immigrants at all. It was saved by soldiers, by a court case, by frozen food chemists, and by an industry that quietly rebuilt the recipe from scratch. The tomato on top was considered poisonous in Europe for roughly 200 years, and the reason why has nothing to do with the plant itself. The men who turned pizza into a national business in America were often not chefs, and some of them weren't running restaurants for the reason you'd expect. And the authentic Neapolitan pizza sold worldwide today follows rules that were written more recently than the personal computer. Somewhere between a slum in Naples and 5 billion pizzas a year, someone decided what the truth would be. The real question isn't who invented pizza, it's who benefited from making sure you never found out. If one ordinary food can hide a story this strange, imagine what's sitting in the rest of your kitchen. Subscribe, because the next one is even harder to believe. Start with the story everyone knows, because it's the cleanest lie in food history. A queen visits Naples, gets tired of French cooking, and asks to try what the common people eat. A local pizza maker named Raffaele Esposito prepares 3 pizzas for her. She loves the one with tomato, mozzarella, and basil because it looks like the Italian flag. He names it after her, and the Margherita is born. It's a perfect story, and it's repeated in cookbooks, on menus, and in tourist guides all over the world. The problem is that the evidence behind it is one single document, a thank you note supposedly written by the royal household. Researchers who examined it found real problems with the wording and the layout of the letterhead. The style of the seal doesn't match other royal documents from the same period. And the note surfaced publicly decades after it was supposedly written, kept by the family that profited from it most. There's a bigger issue with the story, though, and it has nothing to do with paperwork. Pizza with cheese and tomato already existed before that visit. Cookbooks and travel accounts from earlier in the century describe pizza topped with cheese, tomato, and herbs, sold in Naples for almost nothing. The tricolor explanation is charming, but Italians had been putting those ingredients together long before anyone connected them to a flag. Which means the margherita wasn't invented that day. It was renamed. And renaming something is a marketing move, not a culinary one. To understand why anyone needed that marketing move, you have to understand how Italians actually felt about pizza. They hated it. Not disliked it, not ignored it. Actively looked down on it. In Naples, pizza was the food of people living in single rooms with no ovens and no money. Sellers carried it through the streets in copper containers balanced on their heads, shouting prices. There was even a system called pizza a otto, which meant you could eat your pizza today and pay for it in 8 days. It was a food sold on credit to people who often couldn't pay at all. Alexandre Dumas, who traveled through Naples, described the poorest residents as living on almost nothing but pizza and watermelon, depending on the season. He wasn't praising the cuisine. He was documenting poverty. Other visitors were far less polite about it. Samuel Morse, the American who developed the telegraph code, saw pizza in Naples and called it a disgusting thing. He compared it to a piece of bread that had been pulled out of a sewer. That was a common reaction among educated travelers. Pizza looked burnt, it was handled without ceremony, and it was cooked in ovens shared by entire neighborhoods. Respectable Italians in the north didn't eat it, didn't sell it, and in many cases had never seen it. For most of Italy, pizza wasn't a national dish.
It was a regional embarrassment attached to the poorest large city in the country. That poverty is the key to everything that follows. Naples had been the capital of its own kingdom, one of the biggest cities in Europe, and then Italy unified and Naples lost its status almost overnight. Money and power moved north. The population stayed. The city became overcrowded in a way that shocked people who visited, with families packed into ground-floor rooms that opened directly onto the street. Those rooms had no cooking facilities, which is exactly why a cheap, portable, fully cooked food dominated. Pizza didn't spread because it tasted incredible. It spread because it was the only realistic dinner for tens of thousands of people. Then, Naples got hit by cholera, and the food's reputation collapsed even further. Officials blamed the city's raw food, its street vendors, and its water. Pizza sellers were treated as part of the health problem, and the government launched a massive rebuilding project to tear through the old neighborhoods. The stalls, the shared ovens, and the crowded lanes that made pizza possible were being demolished on purpose. A food that was already considered low class was now considered dangerous. If you had visited Italy in that period and predicted that this specific dish would become the most popular prepared food on earth, people would have laughed at you. So here's where the timeline stops making sense. Pizza had no prestige, no wealthy customers, no national support, and a public health scandal attached to it. It wasn't being exported, and Italian chefs writing serious cookbooks barely mentioned it. And yet, within a single century, it became a global industry worth well over $100 billion a year. Something happened that had almost nothing to do with Italy, and Italians themselves were among the last people to notice. In fact, pizza became popular across Italy only after Americans made it famous. Italians in Milan and Turin were eating pizza because it arrived back home as an American trend. That alone should make you suspicious of the origin story. But the deeper problem is the word itself. There's a legal document from the town of Gaeta written more than 1,000 years ago, where a tenant agrees to pay his rent partly in pizzas, 12 of them every year. That's centuries before tomatoes existed in Europe. Whatever that document is describing, it isn't the food you're thinking of. Which raises the question that unravels the entire Italian claim. If people were paying rent in pizza long before anyone in Europe had ever seen a tomato, then what exactly were they making? Who taught them to make it? And how far back does the real recipe actually go? Long before anyone in Italy said the word pizza, people across the ancient world were already doing the essential thing. They were taking ground grain, mixing it with water, flattening it, and baking it on hot stone. Archaeologists in Sardinia found the remains of leavened flatbread that is roughly 7,000 years old. That means people were eating raised, baked flatbread thousands of years before Rome existed as a village. And the reason this matters is simple. Flatbread wasn't a recipe. It was a technology. It was the cheapest way to turn hard grain into food that a human body could actually use.
The next step came from Egypt, and it happened mostly by accident. Egyptian bakers noticed that dough left sitting out would swell on its own and bake into something softer. They had no idea that wild yeast was floating in the air and feeding on the sugars in the grain. They only knew it worked, so they started saving a piece of old dough to start the next batch. That habit, kept alive for thousands of years, is the direct ancestor of every sourdough starter used in pizzerias today.
Egyptian workers were sometimes paid in bread and beer, which came from the same grain and the same process. Bread wasn't just food in the ancient world, it was currency, wages, and political control all at once. The Greeks took the flatbread and started putting things on it. They made something called plakous, which was baked flat and topped with oil, herbs, garlic, cheese, and onion. That is, functionally, a pizza, made 2,500 years before Naples claimed the idea. There are also old accounts of Persian soldiers under Darius baking flatbread on their metal shields over fire, then covering it with cheese and dates. Whether or not that detail is exactly true, it points to something real. Flatbread with toppings kept appearing independently in different cultures with no contact between them, because the logic of it is almost inevitable. Then came Rome, and Rome industrialized it.
Roman bakers were organized into powerful guilds, and the state watched them closely because bread riots could topple leaders. Bakers stamped their loaves with their own mark, partly for pride and partly so the government could trace bad bread back to the person who made it. Roman writers recorded a dish that was baked flat and layered with cheese and honey. Others described flatbreads used as edible plates called trenchers, which soaked up the juices from whatever was piled on top. When the meal was over, you could eat the plate or hand it to the poor outside. In the Aeneid, there's a strange prophecy that the Trojans will eat their own tables, and the moment it comes true is when they eat the flatbread they've been using as plates. The clearest evidence of how far Rome had taken all of this was buried by the eruption of Vesuvius. In the ruins of Pompeii, archaeologists uncovered dozens of commercial bakeries with millstones and enormous domed ovens.
The ovens are shaped almost exactly like the wood-fired pizza ovens still used in Naples today, and Naples is about 15 miles from those ruins. Inside one oven, they found carbonized loaves still sitting where the baker left them, scored into segments so they could be broken apart by hand. The design of that oven never had to be improved. It was already correct. Then, in a house in Pompeii, excavators uncovered a wall painting that made headlines around the world. It shows a round flatbread on a silver tray, covered in what looks like toppings, sitting next to a cup of wine. Media everywhere called it the ancestor of pizza. Researchers had to correct them, and the correction is more interesting than the painting. Whatever is on that flatbread, it isn't pizza, because two of the three things that define modern pizza did not exist anywhere in the Roman world. There were no tomatoes in Europe. There was no mozzarella as we know it, because the water buffalo that produced that milk had not yet arrived in Italy. The Romans had the oven, the dough, and the idea, and they still could not have made a pizza if they wanted to. So the ingredients weren't there. But the word was coming, and this is where the trail gets genuinely strange. The first written appearance of the word pizza has nothing to do with a restaurant, a chef, or a recipe. It shows up in a legal contract from the coastal town of Gaeta, written in the year 997. A local landowner agrees to rent property to a bishop, and part of the payment is 12 pizzas to be delivered twice a year at Christmas and at Easter. The document treats the word as completely ordinary. Nobody explains what a pizza is because everyone reading it already knew. That single line creates a problem that historians still argue about. The word appears fully formed, with no ancestor,
in a place where nobody expected it.
Some trace it to the Greek pitta, some to a Lombard word meaning to bite, some to old words for a piece or a patch of something. None of the explanations are airtight, and there is no surviving recipe, no description, and no image of what those 12 pizzas actually looked like. They may not have been savory at all. Many early Italian pizzas were sweet, made with sugar, nuts, and dried fruit, and served at the end of a meal. Which means the word existed for roughly 800 years before the thing we call pizza did. Something had to arrive from outside Europe to finish it, and that something was already growing on a different continent, inside an empire that was about to be destroyed. The ingredient that turned flatbread into pizza didn't come from Italy at all. It arrived on Spanish ships, taken from an empire Spain had just finished destroying. The tomato was American, grown in Mexico long before Europe knew the plant existed. Spain ruled Naples at the time, so the seeds landed there almost by accident. And for roughly 2 centuries, almost nobody was willing to eat one. Botanists looked at the plant and recognized the family immediately. It was a nightshade, a cousin of plants known to kill people. The suspicion looked scientific, and the evidence seemed to back it up. Wealthy Europeans who ate tomatoes sometimes got violently sick, and a few of them died. What nobody understood was that the tomato wasn't the killer. Rich households ate off pewter plates, and pewter of that era contained a lot of lead. Tomatoes are acidic enough to pull that lead straight out of the metal. The poison came from the dinnerware, not the fruit, and the fruit took the blame for generations. That mistake is the reason pizza exists in the form we know. The poor in Naples couldn't afford pewter, so they ate off wood, clay, or flatbread itself. They started eating tomatoes because they were cheap and grew easily in volcanic soil. No lead, no poisoning, no reason to be afraid. So the single most important ingredient in Italian cooking was rescued by poverty, and the people who saved it were treated as the lowest class in Europe. Naples at that point was one of the biggest cities on the continent, packed with tens of thousands of people with no work and no kitchens. Pizza became the only hot food they could reliably buy, sold in the street by vendors carrying copper drums to keep the slices warm. The economics of it were stranger than the food. Sellers offered something called pizza a otto, which meant you could eat today and pay in 8 days. It was informal credit for people who were often one bad week from starving, and it worked because the seller knew every customer personally. Foreign visitors wrote about this system with a mix of fascination and disgust. Alexandre Dumas, the man who wrote The Three Musketeers, spent time in Naples and described pizza as the entire diet of the poor during winter. He also noted something that historians still find useful. He said the toppings changed constantly depending on what was cheap that week, which means there was never one original recipe to protect. Religion shaped it too, in a way most people never think about. Catholic fasting rules banned meat and often dairy on a huge number of days each year. A flatbread with tomato, garlic, oil, and oregano broke none of those rules, so it could be sold and eaten on days when other street food couldn't. The version we now call marinara survived partly because the church made it convenient. Then politics nearly killed it. When Italy unified, Naples stopped being the capital of its own kingdom and became a poor province of someone else's country. Northern politicians and writers talked about Southerners as if they were a separate and inferior people. Their food was used as evidence. Pizza was described as filthy, indigestible, and proof that the South was backward. Taxes rose, industries collapsed, and millions of Southern Italians did the only thing left to do. They got on ships. This is the moment that changed the destiny of pizza permanently.
and it had nothing to do with cooking. Mass emigration carried the dish out of a city that was ashamed of it. Pizza crossed the Atlantic in the hands of the poorest people leaving Europe, and it arrived in American cities where those same immigrants were treated with the same contempt. For years, it was sold quietly out of grocery stores and bakeries, often without any license at all, mostly to other Italians. The first documented licensed pizzeria in New York opened in the early 1900s, and it sold pizza by the piece, wrapped in paper, priced so a laborer could eat lunch for pocket change. Something else happened in those American bakeries that permanently changed the food. In Naples, ovens burned wood. In New York, bakeries ran on coal because coal was what the city had.
Coal ovens burn differently and dry the dough in a different way, which is why New York pizza developed a crust that Naples never produced. The fuel supply of an American city quietly created a new style of pizza, and almost nobody involved realized they were inventing anything. For decades, it stayed locked inside immigrant neighborhoods. Americans outside those blocks had never heard of it, and Italy still treated it as Southern street food. What broke it open was a war. When Allied forces landed in Italy and took Naples, hundreds of thousands of American soldiers were suddenly living in the city where pizza was born. The irony is brutal. Naples was starving, ingredients were rationed, and real pizza was almost impossible to make. Soldiers ate versions built from whatever the black market could supply. They came home talking about a food most of their neighbors had never tasted, and demand appeared in towns with no Italian population at all. That demand created a problem nobody had solved yet. There was no supply chain for pizza in America, no standard recipe, no reliable cheese, and no way to make it fast enough. Solving that problem would take chemists, factories, lawyers, and a group of men who were not primarily interested in food. The pizza that conquered the world was about to be rebuilt from the inside out. And the first thing they replaced was the ingredient everyone assumed was untouchable. The dark side of pizza doesn't begin in a kitchen. It begins with a federal wiretap, in a case investigators eventually nicknamed the Pizza Connection. For years, American agents kept noticing the same strange pattern in small towns and quiet neighborhoods. Pizzerias with almost no customers were somehow moving enormous amounts of cash through their books. Some of them sat on empty streets and stayed open late for no clear reason. When the FBI finally pulled the thread, they found one of the largest heroin networks ever built inside the United States. Sicilian organized crime had been using independent pizza shops as distribution points and laundering machines. The drugs came through Sicily, the money went back through pizza ovens, and the operation moved well over $1 billion in product. The trial became one of the longest criminal trials in American history, and it permanently changed how banks track cash businesses. But the ugliest detail wasn't the heroin. It was how perfectly pizza worked as a disguise. Because nobody questions a pizzeria that only takes cash. That reputation stuck around long enough to poison something else. In American cities, pizza became one of the few businesses immigrants could enter without money, licenses, or English. That openness attracted honest families, and it also attracted people who understood that a shop with no receipts is a shop with no history. For decades, certain neighborhoods had unwritten rules about who could open where, and violations were settled outside the courts. New York had actual turf conflicts over delivery zones, and some of them ended in arson. The competition was so brutal that owners started guarding their dough recipes the way factories guard patents. And that obsession with speed and territory eventually produced the single deadliest idea in pizza history:
The idea was simple: deliver in 30 minutes or the customer gets it free. It made one company famous and made its drivers desperate. Drivers were young, paid badly, and racing a clock in traffic they couldn't control. Crashes piled up, lawsuits followed, and safety groups started tracking deaths tied directly to delivery speed. The guarantee finally collapsed after a jury awarded nearly $80 million to a woman hit by a delivery car.
The company killed the policy, but the damage was permanent because the entire industry had already learned to measure pizza in minutes instead of quality. That pressure changed the food itself, and it pushed the industry toward ingredients that were fast, cheap, and shockingly fake. Cheese was the first casualty. Real mozzarella is expensive, spoils quickly, and behaves badly in an industrial oven. So food scientists engineered something new, usually called pizza cheese, built to stretch further, brown on cue, and survive freezing. Some versions contain very little of what you'd recognize as cheese, and several countries had to write laws forcing manufacturers to label the difference. Investigators in Europe repeatedly found pizzerias using cheese analogs made from vegetable oil and starch while advertising mozzarella on the menu. In Italy, the fraud went further. Buffalo mozzarella from Campania became a protected luxury product, and criminals immediately started faking it with ordinary cow's milk. Then came the contamination scandal that nobody in the industry likes discussing. Parts of Campania had been used for years as an illegal dumping ground for industrial waste, controlled by organized crime. Toxic material was buried in farmland and burned in open fields, and the region picked up a nickname that translates roughly to the Land of Fires. Testing eventually found dangerous dioxin levels in some local buffalo milk, and thousands of animals were destroyed. The scandal hit the most protected, most romanticized pizza ingredient in the world, and it exposed something deeply uncomfortable. The land producing authentic Italian pizza had been quietly damaged by the same criminal networks that once used pizzerias abroad. Tomatoes hid an even bigger secret. Much of the world assumes Italian tomato products come from Italian fields. In reality, enormous quantities of tomato paste are grown and processed in China, shipped to Europe in giant drums, diluted, repacked, and sold with Italian branding. It's legal in many cases, and it's almost invisible to shoppers. Investigations found that some of that Chinese production relied on forced labor in the Xinjiang region. Meanwhile, Italy's own tomato harvest carried its own abuse. Migrant workers in the south have been recruited by illegal labor brokers, housed in makeshift camps, and paid a few euros per crate. People have died of heat and exhaustion picking tomatoes destined for supermarket sauce. The dish everyone treats as cheap comfort food is cheap partly because someone else absorbed the cost. Even the flour became a battlefield. Bleaching agents, additives, and dough conditioners were introduced to make production faster and more predictable, and some of those chemicals were later restricted or banned outright. Frozen pizza brought its own body count in the form of contamination. A major American frozen pizza recall was traced to E. coli that sickened people across dozens of states, and it forced regulators to admit something strange. Nobody had properly tested whether people were cooking frozen pizza thoroughly enough to kill bacteria, because everyone assumed pizza was too simple to be dangerous. Then there's the part that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but isn't. The American government helped design the cheesiest pizzas on the market. A federally connected dairy marketing group worked directly with a major chain to develop menu items that used dramatically more cheese, spending millions to promote them. The same government agencies telling citizens to eat less saturated fat were funding the campaign to sell more of it. Pizza had become too economically important to leave alone, and by then,
it wasn't really a food anymore. It was infrastructure.
And the men who figured out how to industrialize it were about to rewrite what pizza meant everywhere on Earth. The men who came home from the war didn't just want pizza, they wanted it constantly. And that demand created a problem nobody in Naples had ever faced. Traditional pizza depended on a person who knew the dough by feel, who could read a wood fire and rotate a pie by instinct. That skill took years to learn, and America needed thousands of pizzas an hour. So the industry did something Italy would have considered unthinkable. It removed the pizza maker from the process. The breakthrough was a long metal tunnel with a conveyor belt running through it, blasting hot air from above and below. You put a raw pizza in one end, and a finished pizza came out the other, identical every time. Suddenly, a teenager with no training could produce the same product as a craftsman with 20 years of experience. That single machine did more to spread pizza around the world than any chef, any immigrant, or any queen. But the ovens exposed a second problem that almost nobody talks about. Real mozzarella is wet, soft, and made to be eaten within days, and it behaves terribly under industrial conditions. It releases water, it turns the crust soggy, and it refuses to stretch the way people expect. So food scientists rebuilt the cheese from the inside out. They created low-moisture mozzarella, a firmer, saltier, longer-lasting version designed specifically for machines and freezers. The famous cheese pull you see in every commercial is not an ancient Italian tradition. It's an engineered property, studied in laboratories, measured with instruments, and adjusted by changing fat, moisture, and protein levels. Researchers even studied why cheese blisters and browns in exactly the right pattern, because that look sells pizza before anyone tastes it. Once the cheese was solved, the freezer became the next frontier. And this is where pizza escaped restaurants completely. Early frozen pizza was genuinely awful because freezing destroys the crust and turns it into cardboard. One of the people who fixed it was a woman named Rose Totino, who ran a small pizzeria with her husband and had to prove to a bank that pizza was even a real food before they'd lend her money. She and her team developed a crust that could survive freezing and still crisp in a home oven. And that innovation made her one of the first female corporate vice presidents in a major American food company. A dish once sold to the poorest people in Naples was now a patented industrial product. Then something happened that most people would never guess was connected to pizza. America had a massive dairy surplus, hundreds of millions of pounds of cheese the government had bought and stored in warehouses and even in underground caves. The country needed people to eat far more cheese than they naturally wanted. A dairy marketing organization, funded through fees on farmers and supported by the federal government, began working directly with pizza chains. They helped develop and promote pizzas with dramatically more cheese, including stuffed crusts and extra cheese campaigns. The most successful pizza marketing in history wasn't purely a business idea. It was partly a solution to a national cheese problem, and it permanently reset how much cheese people expect on a pizza. While that was happening, the toppings themselves were being quietly invented. Pepperoni, the topping most people consider the definition of pizza, does not exist in traditional Italian cooking. It was created by Italian-American butchers, and if you order it in Italy, you'll likely receive peppers instead. Pineapple on pizza, endlessly mocked as an Italian insult, was invented by a Greek immigrant running a diner in a small Canadian town, and he named it after a brand of canned fruit. Deep dish and thick pan pizzas grew out of restaurant economics, since a thicker pie feels like a bigger meal and justifies a higher price. One famous American style was originally baked in blue steel trays borrowed from car factories, where they had been used to hold small parts. Almost every
Classic pizza style was solving a business problem, not honoring a tradition. Speed became the last battleground, and it turned deadly. A major chain built its entire identity on delivering pizza within 30 minutes or giving it away free, which sounded brilliant until drivers began racing through traffic to save 2 minutes. There were crashes, injuries, and lawsuits, and the company eventually dropped the guarantee entirely.
The pizza box itself became a serious engineering project because cardboard traps steam and steam ruins crust, which is why boxes have vent holes and why that little plastic tripod exists at all. Pizza had become less a recipe and more a delivery system, optimized down to the millimeter. The strangest consequence came from politics. Because pizza carried tomato paste, it became part of a long argument about school nutrition, and lawmakers effectively kept a small serving of pizza sauce counted as a vegetable serving in school meals. Companies with pizza contracts lobbied hard for that outcome, and they won. Millions of children grew up in a system where pizza legally helped satisfy a vegetable requirement. By this point, the myths were collapsing one after another. Pizza is not an ancient Italian recipe preserved by tradition. The cheese was redesigned, the crust was patented, the toppings were invented overseas, the oven replaced the craftsman, and the portion sizes were shaped by surplus and marketing budgets. Yet the industry needed customers to believe the opposite, and so a new idea appeared, an official definition of authentic pizza with strict written rules. What almost nobody realizes is who wrote those rules, when they were written, and what they were actually protecting. Walk into a modern pizzeria in Naples and you'll see a certificate on the wall, proof that the place follows the official rules. Those rules cover dough hydration, oven temperature, even the diameter of the finished pizza. What almost nobody realizes is that the entire system exists because of a fear that pizza was slipping out of Italian hands. The association behind it was created in the 80s when Neapolitans watched American chains open across Europe and sell something they barely recognized.
So they wrote down a tradition that had never been written down before, and in doing so, they froze it in place. The authentic pizza that food tourists chase today is a legal definition, and it was drafted by people who had already lost the argument once. The science underneath it is stranger than the rulebook. A real Neapolitan pizza cooks in about 60 to 90 seconds at close to 900 degrees. At that temperature, the outer edge inflates before the water inside can escape, which is why you get those hollow, blistered bubbles. Food scientists call the dark spots leoparding, and they're not burn marks. They're sugars and proteins reacting at speeds that don't happen in a home oven. This is the reason your kitchen can never quite reproduce it, no matter what recipe you follow. Your oven isn't underpowered. It's operating in a completely different chemical range. Then there's the cheese, and here the story stops being Italian at all.
Fresh mozzarella is wet, and wet cheese doesn't brown properly. So American producers engineered a drier version, low-moisture mozzarella, specifically because it melts, stretches, and blisters on a pizza. It was a manufacturing decision, not a culinary one. That single invention made industrial pizza possible, because dry cheese ships well, freezes well, and behaves predictably. Most of the cheese on the planet's pizzas descends from that compromise. And cheese is where the politics quietly return. When American dairy production outran demand, the government ended up buying and storing enormous quantities of surplus cheese, some of it kept in refrigerated caves carved into limestone in Missouri. To move that mountain, a dairy marketing organization worked directly with pizza chains, helping design menu items that used dramatically more cheese per pie. Those stuffed crusts and extra cheese promotions you remember weren't purely chef inspiration.
They were partly a solution to a national storage problem, and it worked. Pizza became the single largest destination for American mozzarella. Nutrition politics went further than most people believe. During a fight over school lunch standards in the United States, lawmakers effectively kept tomato paste counted toward a vegetable serving, which meant a slice of school pizza could satisfy part of a child's vegetable requirement. Lobbyists for frozen food companies pushed hard for it. A dish that was once considered filth for the poorest people in Naples had become powerful enough to shape federal nutrition law. There's also a reason pizza is so hard to stop eating, and researchers have measured it. Studies asking people which foods they struggle to control most often place pizza at the very top. The explanation is a stack of triggers happening at once. Fat, salt, and fast carbohydrates arrive together, which almost never happens in nature.
On top of that, tomatoes, aged cheese, and cured meat are all loaded with glutamates, the compounds behind savory depth. Layering 3 separate glutamate sources multiplies the effect far beyond what any one of them does alone. Nobody designed that combination on purpose. It was discovered by accident and then optimized by companies who understood exactly what they had. Meanwhile, the ingredients themselves are dissolving into fraud. The famous San Marzano tomato grows in a tiny protected zone near Vesuvius, and genuine certified production is small. Yet supermarkets around the world stock enormous quantities of cans labeled with that name. Investigators have repeatedly found that a large share are simply not what they claim. Buffalo mozzarella has had its own crisis, including a contamination scandal that shut down exports and shattered trust in an entire region's dairy industry. Even fire has become a legal problem.
Wood-burning ovens release fine particulates, and several cities and Italian regions have restricted or regulated them for air quality reasons. Some historic pizzerias have been forced to install filtration systems that cost more than the ovens themselves. The tradition that took 2 centuries to build is now colliding with pollution law. What's genuinely being lost is the older, poorer version of the dish. Fried pizza kept Naples alive after the war, when ovens were destroyed and toppings were unaffordable. Dough was fried, folded, and sold on credit to people who would pay in a week if they could. That version has nearly disappeared, replaced by the polished tourist product that photographs better. So the question from the beginning finally has an answer. Somebody benefited from the fake royal story, and it wasn't one villain. Naples got a noble origin instead of a slum origin. Italy got a national symbol. The industry got permission to sell tradition while manufacturing something new. Everyone had a reason to keep the legend intact, which is exactly why it survived. Pizza was never really Italian, and it was never really American. It was always the food of people who had almost nothing, made from whatever was cheap, and every time the world changed, it changed with it. The strangest part is that it's still changing right now, in ways nobody will notice for another 100 years.